Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. You're listening to IXIAtalks episode 12, Design Thinking, It's Not Just for Software, It's for Docs Too. I'm Sydney Jones, your host and Head of Marketing Communications here at IXIASOFT. IXIAtalks is a webinar series that covers DITA, Agile Document Management, localization, IXIASOFT's very own CCMS, and many more topics. Episodes are released periodically and cover a wide range of topics in the TechCom industry. Before we get started, there are a few things that you should know. First off, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to the recorded version about an hour or two after it airs, so you can share this with colleagues who weren't able to make it today. We can't hear you, so for those of you trying to be extra quiet, don't worry, you are always on mute. And finally, if you would like to ask a question during the webinar, we'll open up the floor for a Q&A section at the end. And you can type those questions into the questions box in your control panel in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. So now onto the show. Our guests today are Frank Miller from Ryffine, and he is tuning in from Colorado. And we have Solene Carbonel from IXIASOFT. She's our UX designer, and she is currently in France. However, she's with me today in the Montreal office, so I'm sitting right across from her. So welcome both to IXIAtalks. We're very happy to have you.
Hello,
Hi,
Sydney.
Sydney.
Before we get into today's topic, I will let you introduce each other to our audience and tell our audience one interesting fact about the other person.
Okay, so Frank is the CEO. Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's my turn.
It's your turn, Frank.
I'm going for Celine. Yes, I'd like to introduce Celine Carbonell. She's the user experience designer at IXIASOFT, so is going to be able to give us the real expertise around that discipline and philosophy in this presentation. She's based out of France, but is currently in Montreal, as Sydney mentioned. Her background is in psychology, and you'll see how that kind of plays into the thinking around UX design and how to make that line up with the people and their psyches. Celine was one of the lead drivers, is one of the lead drivers of the move out of the Eclipse viewer and into the web interface in the IXIASOFT product. So a lot of this thinking is really going to be apparent for IXIASOFT users, especially those who are transitioning over to the web UI. That's the interesting thing about Celine as I know it.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
Frank is the CEO and founder of Ryffine. He's based in Denver. And Ryffine is a company that provides a customized approach to help improve the way you develop, manage, and present your content. Frank has a background in journalism and data system and has been involved in dozens of successful DITA implementations over the past 15 years. He enjoys sharing his insights and trends and facilitating the adoption of best practices. And talking about adoption, did you know Frank adopted 3 rescued dogs its past years? Well, not so surprising if you think that the official Colorado state pet is in fact a rescued dog. I think it says a lot about him.
I agree. All right, so as we're getting into the presentation now, I will just go over our main topic. So first off, Solene will explain to us what is user experience, what is UX. If you haven't heard of it before, this is a great opportunity to get the details as to what it is. It's a relatively new concept, and it's something that's very hot right now. Next up, we'll link this to design thinking, how to adapt it, and then we'll get into design thinking philosophy as it relates to documentation. And then Frank's part will deal with how a DITA infrastructure can bring these designs to life, and we'll wrap up with the standard Q&A section at the end. So Solene, I will let you start.
Thanks, Sydney. So first of all, what is user experience? Well, it simply is how you feel about every interaction you have with what is in front of you in the moment you are using it. So how can we define a positive user experience? To create a positive user experience, a system needs to combine the ergonomics principles, which are usability, which means the system answers users' needs, efficiency, which means users can achieve their goal without wasting time or energy, and satisfaction, which is the user's comfort and positive attitudes towards the use of the system. But why does user experience matter? Well, because it tries to fulfill the user's needs and it prevents possible usability issues which lead to better products, services, and internal processes. Also, a positive user experience keeps users loyal to the product or brand, and this is why it's so important to have a user-centric approach. So, if it's so important, why have we been speaking of it only these last few years? Is it something new? Well, the answer is no. User experience has always been taken into account in the history. In fact, it's everywhere. It's just that no one had given it a name yet. For example, 4,000 years BC, with the Feng Shui, Chinese were already thinking of user experience. Indeed, Feng Shui is all about arranging your surroundings in the most optimal and user-friendly way. We can also give the example of the ancient Greeks, who designed their tools and workplaces based on ergonomics principles 500 years BC. Continuing on the quest for workplace efficiency, in 1940, Toyota developed their famous human-centered production system. Much attention was paid to creating the optimal working environment, and human input was considered crucial and was actively encouraged. Surprisingly, we can also name Walt Disney, who is considered as the first UX designer in the history. Indeed, Disney was obsessed with creating magical, immersive, near-perfect user experiences, and two of his guiding principles for his team were know your audience and wear your guest's shoes, which is really what user experience means. So, as we can see, user experience has always been there, but it's only in 1995 that Donald Norman, a cognitive scientist, came up with the term user experience design to cover all aspects of the person's experience with the system. In 1988, he published The Design of Everyday Things, a really great book if you want to read it, where he describes the user experience of things that we use every day, like the poorly designed doors, for example. You know this door that we never know if we need to push or pull. So now that we know what user experience is, we are going to speak about how to create a positive user experience using a process called design thinking. This human-centered process is a really powerful solution-based strategy that encourages you to focus on the people you are creating for. It allows to create innovative solutions for and with the people concerned. The design thinking has been slowly evolving since the 1960s. It started with researchers who wanted to understand how designers got the ideas that no one else did. So they started to investigate into design processes. They observed designers while they were alone and working together in teams. And this is how design started to be described as a way of thinking, a way of solving weak problems, and not only a way to make things beautiful. Then, a few years later, the term design thinking was used for the first time to describe methodologies used by architects and urbanists. But as Richard Buchanan said, design thinking isn't limited to design. It can be applied to every field. As he said, design has no subject matter. We make our subject matter. And this is how, in 1990, Tim Brown and David Kelly came up with a formalized design thinking process in 5 steps that can be used to solve any kind of problem. These 5 steps are the following ones, and we are now going to explain each of them. So the first step is called empathize. During this phase, you want to understand your users and their needs. To do that, you can conduct interviews with the people concerned, users, but also people in your team who are close to the users, the support team, for example. You can also observe users in their environment, create surveys, or analyze any kind of information you can find, for example, on forums or internal platforms. Then comes the define step, where you analyze information gathered in the previous stage to find patterns. Here you can create persona or experience map to help you understand the experience of your users. Once you have your problems defined, it's time to create as many ideas as possible to solve them. This is the ideation phase. Here, the best is to create groups with people concerned by the project. Here, the quantity of ideas is more important than the quality. Even something crazy that only crossed your mind for a second can be useful. You can discuss it and create new ideas on top of it. Different methods can be used to generate ideas. For example, the brainstorming or the design studio sessions, which consist in writing and drawing as many solutions as possible and then vote to select the one you want to focus on. Once you have your ideas, you can start to create prototypes. The first type of prototype you should create are the handmade prototypes. They allow you to quickly visualize and test various ideas with your team. After several back and forth, you can create high-fidelity prototypes, which are then tested by users. Different kinds of tests can be done. They can be in person or in remote, moderated or not. It depends on your working context. Every feedback you get will help you to quickly redefine the problems and find new solutions that will better satisfy your users. So, as you can see, design thinking is a really powerful solution-based strategy. The two first steps are really here to find the right problem, and the last third ones help you to find the right solution. This process gives you a lot of different tools that can be used to solve any kind of problems. But it's important to understand that this is not a linear process and that iteration is the key. It is necessary to go back and forth between the different steps. So now to show you how to use it and how it can be applied to different problems, I am going to present you two use cases. One about software with how to improve IXIASOFT CMS for people who write content, and one which is about documentation with how to improve an installation guide to help people installing their internet box. Then I let Frank take the following part to go deeper into how to use this approach for content strategy and how DITA can help. So first, how to improve IXIASOFT CMS. First, we need to find the right problem. So we need to think about who are we designing for? Who are the people who write content? What are their ways of working? And what problems are they facing with the current software? We want to know our users. To do this, we organize workshops in person or remote meetings with different categories of writers. We talk with them and we observe them working. We also do research at our office by speaking with people who are close to our users and by collecting data from different platforms. Then we analyze all the data we got to find patterns and answer our questions. At IXIASOFT, we discovered that writers weren't only technical writers, but they could be developers or engineers, and that some of their major issues were the performance of the software, actions that are time-consuming, and the complexity of working as a team, for example. Then we start to focus on finding the right solution. To do that, we rephrase our problems in questions starting by how might we? This allows people to focus on solutions and to open their mind. So, how might we improve the performance? How might we make the teamwork more efficient? And how might we reduce the time required to complete actions? Based on these questions, we organize brainstormings or design studio sessions with our customers or with our different teams at IXIASOFT to create as many ideas as possible. It's really nice during these workshops to have people from different fields. People from sales, for example, from the support team, developers. Everyone will bring its own vision of the problem, and this is really interesting. Then, once we have these ideas, we vote, select the ones we want to work on, and start prototyping. First, our prototypes are made by hand to have a whole picture of what is needed. Then we organize meetings to debate on what we should keep or not. Sometimes it happens that we are blocked during this phase because while prototyping, we realize that there is something we hadn't thought about before. In this case, we contact some customers to have a quick feedback. After several back and forth, prototypes become more and more detailed, and we can create interactive prototypes, which are then tested by users. With their feedback, we can then improve the features. So this is how we use design thinking to improve IXIASOFT CMS. Now we will see how we can adapt this process to improve the installation guide of an internet box. So as you can see, we are not speaking about software anymore, but about documentation. This use case was told to me by a friend who also works as UX designer, but for a telecom company. The problem they had was that people who bought the new internet box were having trouble to install it by themselves. So the support team had a lot of pressure, and that's why they decided to rewrite the insertion guide. In the same way than us at IXIASOFT, the first thing was to know who were their users, so in this case, their readers, what problems they were facing when installing their box, and what were the pain points of the current guide. After some research via interviews and surveys, they were able to define two types of readers. The anxious ones, who always read the guide before they start installing their box, and the meticulous ones, who read it only in case of doubts. Here again, different problems were identified, like the huge amount of content on each page of the guide, the absence of structure, and the lack of visual information. As we saw earlier, they used how might we questions and organized workshops to generate ideas. They agreed on 2 ideas of guide and prototyped them. They first did some internal tests that give them feedback. They selected one type of guide, improved it, and tested it with real users, putting them in a scenario where they had to install the internet box. After the implementation of the new guide, the support team got a lot less calls. So, as we can see, the design thinking used to improve user experience can be applied to solve different kinds of problems. It's not just about software. Well, now that we know all of this works, I will now let Frank tell you how to apply it to content strategy.
Thank you, Solene. So as Solene mentioned, and as she showed at the end of her portion of the conversation, the UX design philosophy and thinking can really be applied to documentation. And that's really my role in this conversation, is to try to connect some of those practices and some of those philosophies to what we do and what the customer base of IXIASOFT does, and that is to create product information, to create documentation and get it out to the right person at the right time, on the right device. And so the question is really, how do these things connect? And if you look really closely at the guiding principles of both UX design, as Solene just walked us through, and of content strategy, you'll see that they have a lot in common. And in fact, some of the fundamentals, some of the core values of content strategy and UX design are shared. And that's really around knowing who your audience is. So we share in content strategy the same thing that UX design does around knowing the audience, then defining how we can help the audience through our information designs and our information strategy, and then really trying to satisfy the audience by getting them the content when they need it, where they need it. So there is a lot of shared philosophy around the two strategies. So on the next slide, I really want to talk about, okay, is there currently practices in place in doc teams around UX? And while there are some exceptions, particularly in some larger companies, typically what I'm seeing and anecdotally what I'm hearing is that it really is sort of a handoff between docs and some sort of UX team when it comes to the product information. So it's that throw it over the wall approach. Here, let's give it to the UX team, let's give it to the portal team, the web team, whatever we call it. We're going to take our content packages and throw it over to them, and they're going to deliver it out to the customers. So at some point, documentation loses control over that customer experience. Now, that is not always the case. There are organizations that have a UX role as part of their doc teams, and we see that gradually changing. We see that becoming more of a core competency of what a doc team should deliver. And what I really see is that the ability to personalize content, particularly on the web, is really driving that need for somebody to be involved from the conception of the content all the way out to the delivery of the content. Back when I started started in this industry and started in the systems that I was working on, it was more of a static web. And you couldn't know a whole lot about your customer in a personalized sort of way. You had things like cookies and web session states and query strings, but you didn't have SSO, and you didn't have the things that really tell us a lot about our customer if we want to know that and if we seek that information. Today's web really lets us know a lot about our customer, and so we can personalize that whole experience, which gives us the ability to fold UX design and content strategy into our end-to-end content delivery mechanisms. So on the next slide, I want to just look a little bit at and show you an example of the role of what is called in the industry a UX writer. I pulled this from one of a recruiter that I use with, or that we use, and said, so what does the UX writer do? And I looked at some different job descriptions and some different resumes, and you see really a lot in common with what you would be looking for when you're looking for a good information developer. So over the past decade and even more, the role of the tech writer, the information developer, the documentarian, as some people like to call us, it's evolved. It's become at one point the buzz phrase was technical writers need to be more technical. Okay, so we did that. We're way more technical. We've got a lot of chops in that area now. More strategic, thinking about what is our value to the business? Is it just with the customer, customer documentation, customer delivery, or is it to provide good content throughout the business, throughout the organization, for the support teams, for the marketing teams, for the different departments within our companies that need our content, and they could do their jobs better and provide more value in their businesses if they've got content. So we've got to be thinking about that now, and we have over the past 10 to 20 years, and really made a lot of strides. So this is a natural evolution that a UX design skill set and a UX design mentality would be a part of a core competency of the doc team. So you can see here in the if you're looking at the slide in this sample, it's not a sample, it's a real job description that people are hiring for. You look at that and you see, of course it's UX, but you do see a lot of the tech docs cred that comes in the, what you will be doing and who you are sections of this job description. So the role is really evolving, and it is really folding in those principles of I want to know the user and I want to make a great customer experience for that user, and what is it going to take to do that? So what does it take? I want to talk about that a little on the next slide here. What it takes is what we've been doing all along. If we're doing good, sound, fundamental content strategy, we are actually following a lot of what Solene has just described to us around UX design thinking, and that really starts with that empathize. We have similar and really very much alike things that we do. We're just calling them different things. So if we're empathizing with our customer, we're really understanding all of our personas. We are asking questions that a lot of organizations root in the 4 pillars of minimalism about who are our customers, what do they need in a task-oriented way, how do we help them recover from errors and give them troubleshooting information, and how do we help them find our content? That's minimalism, that's empathizing, that's knowing about our customer. All down the line of define, ideate, prototype, and test, we do all those things in doc groups. We just call them somewhat different things. We define our requirements for our customers and what they need. We build information models. We design, we ideate on that, and then we also, as in content strategy, we define the technologies, the systems, the processes that are going to get our content and our designs out the door and into the hands of whoever is consuming that content. So all of these things are very much married together, and so there's a lot of natural fit in thinking this way, and I think a lot of benefit to be had for documentation groups. Okay, so on the next slide here, I want to ask a question, and this is a rhetorical question that I'm going to answer for myself and for us. But the question is, what should we be doing to align these philosophies and really apply what Solene is talking about to deliver a great customer experience? What should we be doing? And so I think the answer is fairly simple in to answer. Executing on it might be a little more difficult, but I think it's doable. We need to involve our designers, or at least apply that philosophy earlier on in the game, earlier on in the start of a project, a product definition, early on in that content life cycle, and then resist that urge to throw it over the wall, to diverge from that thinking, and then not sort of see it through. So that usually happens from what my experience is. It usually happens around the time it's time to really build something that's production ready. So that's at around the prototype phase, where the doc team will say, hey, we want it to look like this. We've got some mock-ups for you. We've got some maybe some wireframes or some storyboards. Those are all great practices. Those are all things that can really bring to life an information design. But too often we see those kind of thrown over to the people who will, quote unquote, make it pretty. We don't just need to make it pretty. We actually need to make it real and make it targeted and make it deliver the content that we've got under the hood in our infrastructure. So that requires us to really be involved all along the way and go beyond that prototyping stage, and really maybe have more of a hand in building out these portals, these packages that we're delivering out to our customers. So the answer might be sound simple, is let's be involved all the way and not throw it over the wall. But the execution of that can be a little more complicated, but I think it's definitely doable. So these principles really do align all the way through, and it's just a matter of doing all of that cycle all the way through iteration, because that's actually when we learn what needs to be adjusted, where we got it right, where we got it wrong, and where we need to go back to the drawing board sometimes. So going through that whole cycle is very, very important, and you can think of that as an agile sprint. If we're involved all the way through to delivery, we can test it, get the analytics, and come back and make our adjustments. So on the next slide here, we get to kind of, okay, how does a DITA shop provide that experience and fuel a sophisticated information design, sophisticated UX design experience? And I think that DITA is a great framework to do something like that. In fact, it's probably the best one when it comes to product information, in order to get to what I talked about earlier, and that's really the personalization. If we're talking personalization, really what we're talking about is context setting. What is the context of this customer? Who are they? What is their role? What are they logging, or what are they looking for? What is their product? Because of the newer technologies like SSO and some of the things that we're seeing in our platforms, we know a lot more about our customers. We have that empathy to we have the ability to empathize to a much greater level. That means that if we're interested in that, we can personalize to a much greater level. DITA provides the mechanisms we need to do that personalization, and I'm particularly talking about the metadata, the mechanisms like subject scheme and topic classifications. I'm talking about keys, the key architecture that delivers that variable content for somebody who's a particular role, has a particular product, lives in a particular region, the keys can actually help us deliver that out into the product or into the portals, and the DITA mechanisms for keys are really allowing us to do that personalization. And let's not forget just about the kind of semantic nature of the DITA architecture, and if that is meaningfully applied in terms of semantics, we know even more about our content, and we can marry that content up with our audience, with the consumer of our content. So it's my belief that with this personalization, we can really sort of see it end to end, from planning, knowing the audience, to planning the information, to delivering it out into the hands of the customer, whether that's an external customer or whether that's somebody in an internal organization within an enterprise. So that's how I think this all relates, how it all connects, and how I believe it is a pretty natural marriage of the two philosophies. And Solene, is that crazy? Does that sound crazy to you, or does that make sense? Is that how you would do it in a documentation group?
Yeah, no, it's not crazy at all. I mean, I think you've really shown how content strategy is linked to the user experience philosophy and how we could implement it better in the documentation team. So when you create content, it's really it's all about the people you are creating for. And now, as you said, there are a lot of methods to know more about them. So I think you're right. And I think also that you demonstrated really well that DITA is an excellent tool to adapt your content to your users, and that's how you are going to create valuable content.
Thanks, Celine. Frank, if you don't have anything else, I think we can get into the questions. Did you have any other comments?
No, let's get into see what the audience has to say and what questions they have.
Perfect. So just another reminder here, if you want to ask a question, just type it into your control panel and we'll try and answer all of these today. So our first question is, are you saying that the doc team also does the UX design? That doesn't work when there are doc teams and UX teams.
I'm saying that the doc teams should collaborate with the UX teams, rather than pitching, just sort of outsourcing, offloading that job strictly to the UX teams.
Yeah, I completely agree. Or you could have also a UX writer in your team directly that would help you.
Okay, so our next question is, what is an example of using DITA metadata for UX design or personalization?
So if you're doing personas, if you're doing that empathize UX design step, you have a handful of personas that need your content. From that, you can define your metadata. So that could be your taxonomy that you have in a subject scheme. That could be something that that you're including in your topics or in your maps. The designs then need to define when each persona gets with what content. So that's the kind of that's the kind of puzzle to put together, is based on this metadata, and the metadata being used to classify our content, what user gets what content at what time. And that's kind of what subject scheme and topic classifications are there for. It's also what the metadata, the in topic and in map metadata in DITA can be used for as well. And of course, the delivery mechanism has to be able to make sense of that. The UI, the web UI needs to have the proper filters and facets that would give that content to a user, hopefully in as few clicks as possible.
Thanks, Frank. So we actually had someone also agree with what you and Celine were saying on the previous question. They say agreed, even though many companies have separate UX and UA doc teams, it is a natural expectation for those teams to work closely. We have another question here. How do you see design thinking overlapping with the increasing shift for documentation as the new marketing? In other words, what makes documentation good marketing, and how can design thinking assist in this?
Solene, do you want to take that one?
I think I'll let you take this one.
Okay, well, repeat that, Sydney.
Okay, so the question is, it was a long one. It was a double question.
No, it's a good one. It's got a couple layers to it. That's why I want you to repeat it.
Okay, so how do you see design thinking overlapping with the increasing shift for documentation as the new marketing, in quotation marks? In other words, what makes documentation good marketing, and how can design thinking assist in this?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is this a better one followed up with afterwards? Maybe we can.
No, I think let's talk about it. So first of all, marketing and documentation. Okay, it's two different. There's two different angles there, right? So you're writing for marketing, you really are more, you're empathizing, you're knowing that persona, but that's a buyer, that's a prospective customer. You really need to know their story, what problems they're trying to, what problems they're trying to solve with your product. And so there is that marketing focus on the person and the thing that they're going through. Where on the documentation side, it is around there's that user focus, but it's also product focus. So you need to know you're talking more with the product teams, and you're understanding the technical capabilities and really the ins and outs of the product. So I think it's possible to do both of those, but it really is a matter of kind of writing from a different point of view. One being the product point of view, and then the other from the from the customer and the character point of view. And that's probably more art than science. And I think that I think it's possible, but you got to be a really good writer to figure that out, and to understand how to straddle both of those worlds, because they are different things. I've seen this, to the job description that I showed on my slides. I've seen some UX, what's called a copywriter role. And the copywriter was really focused on the marketing side of things, on the sales side of things, pre-sales. Whereas the UX writer is really the aftermarket writer. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I probably didn't. But I do see that there's some commonality there, but they are different, different mindsets when you're writing. And I think a good writer can live in both of those worlds.
And we just had someone else write in to kind of validate what you said, Frank, and they said these two are often kept separate. They are totally different customers and totally different writing. So right on with that. We have another question here. Okay, regarding the marketing question, with so much technical documentation now available to buyers before they purchase, tech docs have become sales enablement and marketing docs. Our docs get seen by potential buyers much earlier. The breakdown of the barrier between marketing and tech docs makes the UX perspective increasingly important. So I guess that's not really a question, it's a comment.
Yeah, I think so.
It's a welcome comment.
Yeah, whoever said that, I'm nodding my head and grunting in approval. So it is. It's like we got to figure this out and how to align. I think that's the gist of this whole presentation, is how to align these, because it is becoming more and more important. And this is an opportunity for tech docs. We know the content better than anybody, and that I think includes some of the pre-sales stuff. I mean, we're able to we've got the infrastructure to develop it and deliver it. So it's an opportunity for us and to kind of expand our reach and our influence with what goes out into the world, whether it's aftermarket or whether it's before the sale. So more grunt coming from me of approval.
Okay, so we will take one more question here. I'll read it out. Hang on. We're getting some very long questions, which is good. Okay, so here's a question from Europe. I'm not sure how it works across the Atlantic, but I've personally never heard of UX designers taking care of docs design in Europe. This task is usually left to us in Europe, technical writers, and this is something we learn about it in training. It is expected of technical writers to use common markup language such as DITA or DocBook, so I see this maybe going the other way around in my case. As UX designers usually do not know any markup languages in my experience. Do you have any piece of advice in how to get UX designers interested in documentation?
Well, in France, I hear I hear more and more speaking about UX writer. So in my case, I think even though it's maybe more advanced in the US, it's coming in Europe too, but it's just slower. So, Frank, do you have?
So I think the question was how to get the marketing writer interested.
How to get the UX designer interested in documentation.
Okay, how to get the UX designer interested in documentation. That's a really good question. Well, you could make it part of their job, but I don't know if that's the that's the heavy-handed way, is to say you're responsible for some of this, for some of this content. I think the other way is maybe just some some communication and some education around, hey, this see how important your designs are, and how how essential they are to getting the documentation to the right customer. The designs really can either bury content so that it's not so that the user loses the scent and gives up, or it can actually make for that customer experience that really sets the product and the company apart in terms of brand. So I don't have any at this moment. I'll have to think about it, because that's a really good question. How to get them interested, a UX designer interested in documentation.
We actually, Frank, have a suggestion from a listener, which says UX works more readily with doc if the doc appears in submitted code versus just a separate deliverable like HTML or PDF. So perhaps we can brainstorm a little bit more about that question and then get back to that person a little bit later on.
Well, I think that brings up something that was kind of on my mind, is that when you see that the really sophisticated delivery of docs in software heavy product is when you don't know the difference between docs and product, right? It's just an integrated experience that the content, the docs come out when they're needed, and they're in the product where they're needed. And I think that's how you behind the scenes, that's how you get there, is to the docs as code mentality and process. So I think, whoever said that, I think is on to that, is that that's how we blur the lines between product and documentation. And I think anybody that's working for anywhere on a product team is gonna get into that, and is gonna see how that works and how that makes a lot of sense to do that. So
right,
good idea.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you, Solene, and thank you everyone for listening and asking lots of questions. If you have any other questions for Frank and Solene, you can reach them here at their emails as displayed on the screen, and they're readily available to answer all of those. So this has been a successful episode 12, and our next episode 13 is titled Making Your Data Tell the Right Story, Analytics You Can Really Use. And this will be on Thursday, March 19th at our usual time of 11 a.m. EDT with IXIASOFT's data specialist Lee White and analytics guru / principal at Now Analytics, Matthew Now. So stay tuned for more details. We'll be sending out an email shortly. And if you'd like to be featured in one of our webinars in the future, or you have a topic idea, you can get in touch with me at team.ccms@IXIASOFT.com. So Celine and Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you, Sydney.
And thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.